Okay, pretty much I think this is the side that you were speaking about, Mr. Smith, about the sun getting a hold of it down on these bottom pieces right here. Most of this stuff too, the way I do things is I actually pull the rocks back and I pressure wash. I like to use a little bleach to get rid of any mold. So that way when I push the rocks back against the house when I'm done, it has a you know, there's not a line like you're seeing right here. A lot of this stuff here will scrape off. And then what I like to do is I like to prime and I back roll. So basically what I do is I spray with a sprayer and I prime it with a good primer, not just any paint I can get. I prime it and then I brush it into the cracks. And then we let it dry for a day or so, and then I paint it with the color of the actual house. And then I do the same thing again. I back roll, or back brush we call it, into the house. This is a pretty dry wall. It would be in my opinion, to get in here and knock it out before it gets any drier than this, but it's really not that bad. Now, I'll explain to you when I call you today about this deck as well. I believe what was used on this deck, well, I'll explain that when I give you a call. There's a couple pieces of wood here, like this guy, that is cracked, but the reality is I'll just be able to put it back together and caulk it up. I really see no wood damage. I see nothing that will have to be repaired. It does look as if you know, it wouldn't hurt to go through and put a coat. Some of this stuff here I could use a little bit of primer, but for the most part I don't see using primer on the entire house, so that saves a lot of money because primer's expensive. But a lot of these places, a good power wash, get in here with a good power wash and just make sure, clean it up and kind of clean the whole thing up. Some of these posts, you know, I would actually paint a couple of these posts into the house color just so it doesn't look like it was kind of pieced together, but you know, it is what it is, so that's not a big deal either. It takes 5 minutes. It's usually something I don't even charge. Just kind of knock it out. Now let me see here. This deck, I remember, I think this was Jarnigan who did this deck, if I remember correctly. Deck looks pretty good. It could definitely use another coat. We've got a little bit of sealer, which is coming off. That's just kind of what happens the first year of a deck, but a good power wash could definitely knock it out. Through here, same thing. A lot of the cracks that you see, let me see if I can get close enough. See these cracks, a lot of the cracks and so forth, not really a big deal. It just needs a paint job. You see, like, someone touched it up. There's opposite colors in here that you can kind of see. They didn't touch it up correctly, and when I do this stuff, I make sure that everything is caulked in. Like aspects like this right here, caulked in. Here, caulked in. I like these things so that they do not let water in, and I caulk these edges as well. I do not like water getting into the actual paint. All these guys right here. I kind of like the whole trick is a longevity aspect. I appreciate the fact that they didn't paint the silver flashing, but it could be painted if you decided to. It's not a big deal. I use high-end paint, so it's not like it's going to come off. I definitely like this as well. It's kind of one of those mixed things what we're dealing with here. The door actually looks rather good. They do. The only thing that gets me is for some reason they did the door in a flat, which is always going to be needed to be touched up, and they didn't caulk anything in as well. So for the most part it looks like standard everyday kind of thing. Painted up, not a big deal, just looks like it's time for some paint. The deck looks really good. The only thing I would suggest, I think you and I both agree that it might be good to put another coat on the deck on some of the edges, because sometimes what it is you do it once or twice in the first year, and then after you do that once or twice in the first year, it stays. You know, you basically have the longevity that I'm speaking of, where it actually lasts a lot longer. This guy down here, that would be the same thing. It would be just basically going through and staining it again. Not a big deal, not a high-end expensive job. I do like how they took the brown edge on the bottom and the flashing edge against the deck. I really like that. It's a nice house. I really like this house. I like this deck. It looks like it was done good. I'll explain to you why I think it was done really well when I talked to you today on the telephone. But for the most part, I think couple things that could be done. Let me make sure to shut your gate. Couple things that can be done, you know, just like minor stuff. First thing is prep and power wash. I'm adamant about prep and power wash. It has to be done. It gives you the longevity. I like 7 to 10 year paint jobs. We use the good stuff. We prime a couple of these spots up really nice. You should be able to go easily 7 to 10 years. The deck, you'll probably have to put another coat on it in, you know, a year or two, but it'll just be a mist coat, and it won't be, you know, an expensive situation. It'll be more like someone will come in $500-600, but I really don't know even if you might not need that, because I know this deck was stained last summer, and it was probably last fall actually, because I believe it was getting cold. All this stuff in here, caulk these lines in, caulk these cracks so that they don't end up with more water. And that's your enemy up here. A lot of this stuff, like this guy right here, it's just rough. It needs a paint job. Not a big deal though. I take lights off. So lights come off, all decorations, like the names, you know, everything, all come off the house. They're put in a bucket, then they're kept. I do not like overspray. There's a couple things that I do not like that I saw automatically on this house that is not really to my liking, and that is the fact that they even painted the power cable. I'm not sure if my camera's showing that, but to me that just shows of a blow and go, we call it. They didn't take their time. They didn't use, I mean, they even got paint on stuff like this, you know what I mean? Like, it's very easy to put a piece of paper, masking paper on that and not paint it. This is not rocket science. It's relatively easy as long as you take your time. I like to paint these boxes in and this pipe so that when you drive by the house, it has a very uniform approach. It looks more modern. It looks nice. It looks more like a cabin instead of you know, so forth, a bunch of stuff on here. This, a little bit of primer, back brush it, let it dry, paint it, back brush it. I also tint my primer so that the primer is the same color. A lot of guys won't do that, and then they, you know, they'll tell you, oh, well, I need to get a little extra money because it was more paint than I imagined. The reality of it is just that if you tint your primer, should be good to go. Shouldn't be any issues. It's a beautiful house. It's an amazing little neighborhood, and I know for a fact that I can definitely make it look pretty good. So hopefully I didn't bore you too bad with this here video, and if we have any questions we can discuss it on the phone, and we'll go from there. Thank you.